Hello. So we're live. Just going to wait. See who joins us. Going to be doing a talk tonight about how I wrote my couple of books, and maybe give some advice on practical applications about how you can do the same. Hello, Polly. How you doing? Who else is going to join us? Claire. Hi, Claire. Steve. Thanks for joining, guys. Appreciate it. Give it another couple of minutes, just see who else joins us. I'm told a couple of people might be late. I will be reposting this as well. Can you hear me okay? Someone give me a thumbs up. Just check the mic is working. Hi, Gaynor. Ben, how you doing, bud? Awesome. Awesome. So I'm going to be talking tonight probably for about 45 minutes, however long it takes, just to go through this. I've made a couple of notes just on how I approach the books, mindset and practice. So hopefully you might be able to take something from that. Any questions we can probably put through afterwards, whether it's to do with your projects or anything that I might have said. So a little bit about me. I'm a filmmaker and author, and I teach as well part-time. I started making films when I was about 11. Usual story, I sort of borrowed the family video camera to go off and shoot our own Indiana Jones style movies. Been doing that ever since. And about 15 years ago I started teaching a place called the ITV West Television Workshop. And after I was doing that for about sort of 10 years, I collated all these notes, handouts, and ideas about sort of how to get the ideas of how to teach younger filmmakers the ways and means about making your own movies. And what I tried to do after that, oh hi Ellie, what I tried to do that was basically I thought I'd put them all in a book, and sort of try and sort of share that knowledge and help the students that I've been teaching. My first book, which was here, it's Shooting Better Movies, the Student Filmmaker's Guide. This came out in 2017. And I wrote it on spec. I didn't have a contract or anything like that. I didn't really know what I was going to do with it. And part of the chapters, one of the chapters, I was making some interviews with local filmmakers and gaffers and camera assistants, students, all that kind of stuff. And I was interviewing them, and one of the interviewees was a guy called Penn Densham, who's a filmmaker from America, and he had written a book on screenwriting, and it was during the interviewing process he asked me what my plans were for the book, and I said I didn't know, and he said, look, you should get in contact with my publisher, who is a company called Michael VC Productions, and they might be interested. And when I'd finished the book, I emailed Michael VC, and they kindly took the book on. So that was the first book that came out, and then I put together some notes for the second book, which comes out on the 1st of March, called Making Your First Blockbuster. So it's more of the same, but a little bit more in depth, to do with special effects and visual effects and a few other things. Music, visual effects, sort of all doing that kind of CG work. And that comes out March. It's out in the States, but it comes out over here, March the 1st, I think, on Amazon. So what I've got here, like I said, I've got a few notes about how I wrote those books, and they break down to two sections. The first is like the mind game, about how I think you need to get your head right first, and about whether before you start, and also what you're writing about. And then the second thing is the practice, how you do the actual work of the writing, reviewing, where do you start, and stuff like that. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. Oh, hi Jeff, few other people have joined. Kieran, how you doing? Thanks, guys. So the first thing is I realised that books aren't necessarily written by sort of superhuman people. as a kid growing up, you always think that books are kind of PhD educated university types, but you realize that actually books are written by people just like you and just like me. So you don't have to have some kind of, sort of, higher education or kind of like a degree in whatever you're talking about. Books can be written by anyone, and that was something that took me a while to get my head around, because I suffer a little bit from what they call imposter syndrome, where you don't really think that you should be where you are or you should be doing what you're doing, and that should be left to other people. And speaking to a few other sort of filmmakers and writers, I'm not alone in that. There's a lot of people out there that feel that way. So the first thing is, the second thing as well is excuses about like why you're not going to write your book. And I've seen it a lot where people are sort of blaming their job or their kids or the time, just haven't got the ways to sit down and do it. But it's important, I think, not to define yourself and go, well, I can't because, or I'm not that sort of person, or I can only work this particular way, or anything like that. So I think excuses are a big thing that kind of stops people from doing what you want to do. And the big excuse really for me, which I've had myself and I've used myself, and I think other people use it as well, is time, where they just say, I haven't got the time. By the time I finish work late, or I've got these kids, or I've got this, or I've got that, you don't understand, I've got this, whatever that excuse might be. And it's funny when I speak to those people, when they talk about time and they say, but whatever it might be, I've got this, finished work late, or I've got the kids to take care of, or whatever. But I know a lot of people, parents or even single parent families who have got kids that are off, set up their own business, writing their own books, writing their own screenplays, and they make the time. And I think that's the trick. And I always find it quite funny when I speak to those people and they talk about time, and then I might speak to them later or see on Facebook that they've just finished season 4 of Peaky Blinders, and that's like 30-40 hours of TV they found the time to do. So what could you do with 30-40 hours? And it's quite a lot, I think. So I think the other thing is fear. People are frightened about doing something, whether they're feeling that they're no good. They have limiting beliefs. Others are better than me. Why should I write this? Do people care about what I want to say? And those limiting beliefs are an important thing to kind of get past, or at least identify that you have them. And fear is a big thing that stops people doing a lot of things, really. Beware of family and friends as well making comments. Maybe as soon as you announce that you're going to write a book, or you're going to write a screenplay or make a film or do anything, sometimes friends and family can be either kind of intentionally harsh towards your aspirations or your dreams, or they can do it without realizing it. And I think you just have to be aware of that, because they might turn around and say, what why are you writing a book? What why would anyone read that? And they can say sort of nasty comments. And I think it's just important to be aware of those reactions. And I mean, I mentioned Penn Densham earlier, who's a writer, and he told me something once, that he says whenever you tell anyone an idea, he said it's really important to have what he calls story midwives, where you tell someone the story and they help you deliver that story, but they won't comment on how you should raise it or what you should call it or anything like that. And it could just be a really sort of bad reaction to your idea that could stop it dead. I've even mentioned ideas to friends and family. Oh, I've got an idea for this film, it's this and this, and they've just gone, oh, it sounds a little bit like that, or it sounds a little bit like that film that Spielberg did, or whatever. And it's just that subtle dismissal of your idea that might mean that you stop writing or don't take it any further than that. And I think that's really harsh and really sad, and it's a really bad thing if your story or your idea stops there because the first person you told kind of dismissed it. So what else have we got? If you've never written before, that's a big thing. I had a blog before I wrote my first book. I wasn't particularly active on it, but I didn't study English. And if you think about it, all writers to some degree must write their first book. Even people that are paid writers now who are on their 15th, 16th book, they had to write the first one. So don't think for a second that because you haven't written anything that no one's, that you can't. Other books that are similar, yeah. So there might be another book out there that you kind of go, oh, I want to write this thing, but I think there's already 5, 6, 10 other books on that subject. So you ask yourself, why would people want to read yours? And again, I think that's limiting beliefs kicking in, that you think that yours isn't good enough, or yours won't be, kind of taken seriously. Take a sip of coffee from my Conair mug for a minute. Spelling and grammar is an interesting thing. I'm not particularly amazing at either of those things. In fact, I went out and bought a book on grammar, if it's not your strong suit, and spelling as well. I mean, a book editor, if your book got picked up by a publisher, they're going to assign a copy editor that's going to be able to go through that for you. But I think it's important in the first instance, when you put your book in front of the publisher, obviously they need to know that what they're reading has been kind of gone over, and you've taken the care and attention to it, and there's no excuse really now with, even writing emails, it'll tell you if it's spelt wrong, and I think you can give it to friends and family and get sort of proofreading. I've got 3 proofreaders, friends of mine, who are brilliant writers, better than what I am, and everything I do, I just send it to them and go, what do you think of this? And they will give me their honest feedback, and I think that's what you're looking for. You're not looking for people to say, yeah, it's great, but secretly they found the first bit boring or whatever. You want someone to go through it with a red pen and just say, look, this is wrong, or this is working at. And I'm lucky to have those proofreaders who have helped me with any of my scripts or anything like that. And I've got one friend who actually joked that you should proofread my shopping list, just to make sure that it's all spelt right. So ask what, and I was thinking that's another thing. Ask what you don't know about whether it's spelling or grammar or whatever. Ask what you don't know, and then go out and research and read up on that, so you're completely up to date and you know where you are with it. It's another point of fact here is, don't feel that you need to be an expert in your field or the best person in that area, but what you are is just knowledgeable enough to have the ability to communicate that information and articulate it in a particular way that others can understand it. So you might not be the best person, but actually the way, I'm a cameraman, and there's DPs out there, so there's cameramen way better than what I am, but are they able to, and I've seen them actually go into universities and talk about what they do, and they can't take what they do in the day job and kind of articulate it so the student can understand it. So it's about finding that common ground, giving them a way of understanding it, and giving them that way of just so it sort of clicks in their head. So you might not be the best person in your area, but the way you can talk about it and communicate it is what you're good at. If you find something that's interesting to you, there's chances are that other people might also be interested in it. I mean, the opening line for my new book is that you're about to read the book that I wish I had when I was 18. Because when I was making movies when I was growing up, I wanted to know the information that, I know now, but I didn't know about then, and I made loads of mistakes, which is why I thought, if I write this down, other people might find it beneficial. So if you be a good judge of what's worth putting out to the market, if you find it interesting, the chances are other people will as well. Okay, so that's kind of mindset, kind of fear, time, spelling and grammar and all that kind of stuff. So just moving on to practice now, and just kind of what the content of the book might be. Ideas are the big thing of what you're going to write about. And I don't think this is something that you pick, but it's something that picks you. It's kind of like if you ever found yourself wanting a hobby. If you just went out and said, I'm just going to try golf, chances are you might not connect with it. But if you find yourself in your day job or your part-time, you've always had an interest in sewing, or you've had an interest in technology or computers or something, then the subject is already there for you. And I think you're drawn to that rather than sitting down to try and find something to write about. And finding a niche is good. So you might have an idea to write I thought something here where it says like you could write something on healthy food recipes, but then you can narrow it down and say healthy food for athletes, or you could narrow it down again and say healthy foods for bodybuilders, or then you go down even further and say healthy foods for vegan bodybuilders. So you're kind of making it quite specific, rather than being sort of general and trying to write about something that's and spreading all that information quite thin. You're writing about a particular niche thing that others might benefit. I think the big thing for me is whether I'm writing a book, writing a screenplay, or doing any kind of project is to just start. Open that Word document, save it as whatever the title is or the working title is of the book, and then you've literally started it. And I think it's those tiny wins each day that you create the momentum, and that in turns kind of helps you get into the creative zone. And then starting anything is a shift. It's a change in gears in your head where you're kind of, instead of just trying to find the right time, you don't know quite what the first word's going to be, you don't know quite how to start it, and that's paralyzing. But opening the document and going, right, I'm going to start, and then just start writing something. And I'm going to give you a few tips now where the ways that I've approached that. I personally just start with like lines of notes, just like chapter subjects, and under that you kind of have sections on what you're going to cover. It could just be one word or one line, and then just start structuring that and ordering it. I mean, I've got an idea for a new book at the moment. I've got some notes here, and it's a book on lighting. And this is, this is rule number one, make sure you can read your own handwriting. So kind of, I've just made a few notes here about starting out mindset. Is it for newbies or is it for advanced people? Lighting for green screen, using smoke, grading, blocking lenses. So it's just ideas about what could be covered. And then out of that, I'm going to start ordering, where that needs to go. That's quite advanced. That's going to go at the end of the book. This is quite an introductory thing, so that needs to go to the start. And then eventually you're going to start, this structure going to emerge and going to form. And I think and then you're kind of off. And then under that line, under that subject, you could expand it a little bit more and delve deeper into it. Schedule is this thing which is really important. Schedule blocks of time to work on your book or your script. And I think consistency is key there. So I used to sort of say Tuesday 7 till 10, Sunday 9 till 12, and just put it in the diary and you're going to be writing. And I think the key to success in this or in everything is what gets scheduled gets done. So you write it down. If you leave it up to the gods of just going, I'm going to see if I can do some writing this week, and by the time you come home from work and the kids are asking you to do this and you're just catching up with the latest Game of Thrones, and then you go to bed, and then something else happens a week go by and you haven't touched it. So you have to schedule it so it's you remind your brain to go, look, we need to work on this, and that all adds up. And one section a day, you can make a little make a little section here, then another section, then another section, and before you know it, you have like this complete chapter or a page or even the whole script. And it's just like building a wall or eating a cake where you just do it bit by bit. And that's something that I realised, that I came to the end of my first chapter and then I was going to, start in the next chapter, and I was just like, you kind of getting this momentum, which kind of really works, and it kind of feeds into that creative zone. So the blocks of time, and I think, blocks of time is the longer the better. So like 2 or 3 hours is really good, because then you find yourself in that creative zone. I don't know if you've done it, where if you're ever working on something so intently that you lose track of time, and you're writing, you're doing something, and the phone might ring and it might bring you out of that zone. Or if you stop and put the kettle on, then you've got another quarter of an hour then before you try and work yourself back into that creative headspace. So it's important that you have blocks of time scheduled that are long enough for that to happen. So don't leave it by chance, I put there. This is something that I've done with my writing and my editing, and it's a tip that I picked up from a writer called William Goldman, who died recently. And he said this in his book, What Lie Did I Tell?, where he said, he tells a story where he was visiting a theatre director in New York, who he was chatting to the director while he was watching this rehearsal. These dancers were on stage, and they were just doing their routine, and then they just stopped, and the director stopped talking to William Goldman and turned to the stage and said, "What are you doing?" why have you stopped? And so and the dancers replied, well, that's as far as we've got. And the director said, well, do anything, do something, then we've got something that we can change. Rather than trying to spend all this time trying to work out the exact next move, just do anything. Half of you put your hands in the air, half of you do the splits, half of you jump, whatever. Then we can go, no, that doesn't work, that works, keep that, dump that. And I've done that with I'm writing or whether I'm editing, because it's quite easy to be paralyzed by fear of going, oh, I don't know what to do next. So I just write now, and then you realize that that first couple of lines might be junk and you can get rid of it, or you can then start editing it. So each section that you're working on, I don't, like I said, I didn't officially study English at school, but the way I work it is each sort of section, I have like an intro of what I'm going to be talking about, and I use an example, then another example, and then maybe a contradictory example. Then you have a conclusion, and then you kind of lead, after that conclusion, that sort of leads nicely into the next section. And it flows nicely, it's easy to read, and then the chapter has a structure in the book, and then there's sections in each chapter that also have structure, so you're looking at an overall structure about where the chapters should go, and then within that chapter, the different things that you're talking about, and how that little bit there might be better up there, and move that down there so that flows into there. Maybe you're talking about a similar thing, so it might be a bit awkward for the reader if you're reading something and then you go on to something else and then you're back onto another point again. So sort of just start editing it and seeing how things might fall into place. In the week I put out the note that I was going to be doing this talk, and I had a question sent to me by Claire. So thanks for the question, Claire. Just being about in the creative zone and getting into the state is always tough if you're not in that mindset, and if you find yourself with the time but you're not right up here, or you might find yourself really creatively buzzed but you're actually doing something else, you're on another job, and it's not the right time for you to be working on it. And I was thinking about this, and I think it's interesting that I think for me, discipline is something to master, because I heard something in the week which was quite nice, which is discipline is the path to creativity. And if you can be disciplined enough to sit down at the computer and say, right, this is what we're doing today, and force yourself to do the work. The way I also do it is that I force myself by remembering how I felt when I felt guilty for not doing it. So, use another example. I might be, so if I'm doing a workout in the morning, I might be, if I've had to skip it for a particular reason, and in the afternoon I feel really guilty that I've skipped it. So I'm going, right, I'm in the mood now to do it, but actually I can't because of, time doesn't allow. So then tomorrow morning I'm really going to hit it. But then tomorrow morning you wake up and you're like, not really feeling it. But then I remember how I felt the afternoon before, about how guilty I was that I missed the morning before, and I'm able to sort of, by anchoring that feeling when I was driving home and how I felt, I'm able to use that and go, no, let's do this, because I don't want to have that feeling again this afternoon. So I kind of use that. I picture, another kind of technique is I picture the end result in my head, so maybe holding the finished book, holding the screenplay, and I had a friend of mine, a writer once, who was supposed to write, was just about to write the screenplay, and he took a wad of paper and just printed the title page and then binded it together. And he would walk around with this thing, and to the naked eye, it looks like a completed script, but he hadn't written it yet. But it was just a way of sort of saying to him, this is what you're going to end up with if you do the work. And I thought I really liked that. So you can trick the brain into working, and then I get jazzed into actually doing it. And also I think that the barrier or the wall into getting into that creative zone is like what I call like a formidable house of cards, where it appears to be something that can't be broken, but actually if you get close to it, it falls, and then you're in that zone. And I've a couple of tricks here that I've done. Is I've actually said I've started to work, even if I'm not in the mindset. I thought, do you know what? I'm not in the mind to write, but I'm just going to reread what I did yesterday. And I read it and I check in typos, and then I might just add a line to that paragraph, check a few more typos, add a line, add another line. Oh, I've got an idea for a section here, and then I'm off. And I've kind of tricked the brain And there's a saying which I like, which is the water can't run until the tap's turned on. So you kind of have to go, right, turn the tap on by being here, and you kind of just force that first 5-10 minutes to say, look, we need to do this, sit down and do it and do the work that's required. What else have I got here? Yeah, it's just about that sort of formidable house of cards, and the brain is trying to say, don't bother with it, it'd be pointless because you're not in the mood. I've got a business philosopher who's dead now, unfortunately, a guy called Jim Rohn that I follow a lot of his work. I read a lot of his books, and he would say the pain of regret weighs tons, but the pain of discipline weighs ounces. And you don't want to be a New Year's Eve going, right, what's my New Year's resolutions this year? I'm going to write a book. And it's like, well, you said that last year, but you haven't sat down and done it. So you just have to you have to find that time to sit down and do the work, even if you're not feeling it. Okay, style is something when you're writing. I think about finding your own voice. I think it's going to come naturally, but don't force it. I've seen a lot of blogs and books actually where they've had this kind of witty banter. They're trying to be funny. They've got this attitude, and I think if you get it wrong, it comes off as smug. Like they're patting themselves on the back for their jokes and their knowledge. And I've done that myself in some of my earlier blogs, and even the first draft of my first book. I thought, you put in little witticisms and funny little, kind of edges to it, and it just comes off as cocky, really, and it just doesn't play if you don't do it right. You've really got to have the skill to do it. So find the voice which you naturally write in rather than trying to apply one to it. Making things personal is quite an interesting one, where is there a personal story where you made a mistake in your area that helps demonstrate your point and also makes the reader kind of like you more because you're fallible and that you messed up. So maybe, if they've done something similar, they go, hey, I've also done that, but here's an explanation, or here's a way of doing it differently next time. And I think it's important to make sure that comes across. There's a story in the introduction to my new book, actually, which is I've got a chapter in the book about using sort of firearms and guns and armorers and things like that in the movies. And when I was about 18, I was making a movie with some friends, and we had access to these blank firing guns, and we were running around this warehouse. I was in the movie because I was acting back then, and yes, you'll never see it, but I've still got a copy somewhere. But I had this gun in a holster under my jacket, and we're running around this warehouse blasting these blank firing guns, thinking we're James Bond, making a movie. Awesome. And I wasn't driving at the time. I was about 17, 18, and my friend Jamie was driving, and as we were driving home, he said, look, Paul, he said, can I have some petrol money? Because, I've been driving around for this last week. And I said, yeah, sure, no problem. He pulls up outside the bank, I jump out, I go to the cash machine outside, it's out of order, so then I run into the bank, you probably know what's coming, get some money out over the counter, then I run back out to the waiting car in the high street, and as I sit in the passenger seat, this blank firing loaded gun falls out of my holster, and I've realised I just ran into the bank with that. If I'd have been caught, I probably wouldn't be sitting here now, maybe. But basically, it's a funny kind of story in the introduction to say, hey, we will be talking about the proper way to store and use firearms on set in chapter 6 or whatever. So that little personal story, maybe something funny for the reader or shocking, which you then, makes you feel a little bit more human. Yeah, God, that could have ended very nasty. Okay, so information is key. Ask what the takeaway is for the reader, what they're getting out of it. On this particular section, you just don't want to be telling war stories about, I remember doing this, or, I met this person, or whatever it might be. So, obviously, if you are going to be talking about particular people, whether you use their names or not is up to you, but always be thinking, what's the information here? What's the takeaway that's important for the reader? And, if there's nothing there, then you need to think about deleting that bit and not using it because it's just pointless. One of the tips that I got off Pendentium, actually, when we was talking about his book, is that this maybe applies to the film industry more than others really, but mention people in the book who you might want to approach for the blurbs on the back cover. And I stumbled on that with the current book because I was talking about the DP, Dean Cundey, who I grew up with his work. He did Back to the Future and Jurassic Park, and I featured his work quite a lot in the book. And then when it came to asking or sending the book to industry professionals for their comments, so you can put those blurbs on the back cover, I thought, gonna speak to Mr. Cundey, and he was following me on Instagram, so I messaged him, and it went from there. But kind of thinking ahead, what I could do is just go, who do you want, or who would you like to send the book to, and whose work do you admire, and have they done anything which you could then use in your book, whatever that might be. And then kind of what you've got is then when you write to them, say, hey, look, love your work, I mention you in the book, which then makes them think, well, I need to read the book then to find out how I've been mentioned, and they're more likely to give you the kind of the nod and give you something, a blurb for the back cover. Another good tip, when you're writing the chapters or even the sections, is to write them as standalone. It could be standalone value in a blog post. So whether it's for your own blog or whether there's someone that you know that has a blog in your area, if you've written that chapter, that could be lighting for green screen or building computers for gaming or whatever your area might be, there's value then because you can take that section or take that chapter and you can repost it as a blog for exposure come the time when you might want to be publicizing the book. So kind of thinking ahead that way. Sort of engaging titles like how to or 10 ways to do X or what I learned from, that kind of thing. Kind of those sort of titles really sort of get a lot of exposure and a lot of interest and clicks. And you can promote the book later on and you can say, look, this is an excerpt from this book, it's coming out soon. Editing is something which I learned kind of from doing my scripts back in the day, but kind of as a general rule, kind of 25%, the book is, or the script is 25% better if it's 25% shorter. We overwrite, we overindulge in things, especially in screenplays, but kind of one of the things that my copy editor, Ross, who was great with the work that he did with me, where he was cutting stuff back, and he was saying that you're thinking that your message won't be getting across, or it might, everything that you want the audience to know, they're not going to know because there's these bits that have been taken out. And he reassured me, and he was right, that it's all there. People will get the information. It's just that we like to lay it on thick and duplicate and kind of tell the story three different ways from three different angles, when actually you don't need to do that, and the information is there. But sometimes repetition is good. Especially for beginners, because you kind of want to make sure that they get it. So sometimes things do need to be repeated, but just consider the editing and chopping it down, which is really important. The title is an interesting thing. About whatever your title's going to be, does it tell the reader what the book is about? Don't try to be too clever or witty. Having titles that they're kind of quite enigmatic. My new book, Making Your First Blockbuster, it kind of hopefully says, what it does on the tin kind of thing. And it also infers that the film that the reader's about to make is going to be a blockbuster. So you're kind of lifting them up a little bit there. And something that Michael Visu, who's the president of the publishing company that I work with, he was telling me, which is quite interesting. You have to think about the title in this day and age about being sort of keyword friendly from Google and Amazon point of view. And if you have too much of an enigmatic title that doesn't represent what the book is about. So if you were doing a lighting book, if you were to say something like painting with light on a 30-foot canvas, that's the kind of the cool title for lighting for cinema. Actually, if you were to Google that, it doesn't say film, it doesn't say cinematography. If anything, it says painting. So even though it might be a cool title, from a Google keyword point of view, are people going to find it? So that's something just to bear in mind as well. we're going to talk about publishers just before we finish up. I don't have like I say, I've only had my experience with Michael VC, who are a lovely company and a lovely family to work for. But before I got that publishing contract, I was initially going to self-publish. I was investigating how to do that. I had an actor friend of mine that worked part-time for a glue company that makes the glue for publishing companies. So he was saying that, you know, we could do a deal through him to get the book published and get it printed, and we could get 1,000 copies for this amount and stuff. And I was actively pursuing that. Or it could be a free ebook that you give out online, which could be something, or you approach publishers. And when I first got my deal, I didn't know anything about the publishing industry. I didn't know how it worked. But one thing I would say is that you read up on the publishing submission guidelines that are on the publisher's website and actually follow them. And you need to ask what makes your book different, which isn't an easy answer because that's what they're going to ask you. And I had to delve deep for that, and I realized it's not something that just kind of came off the top of my head, but it was the personal stories for me that did it, and the varied information, and I think how the information is conveyed. I kind of like to write as I would be teaching a class where it's a bit more sort of conversational, and it's like, hey, bit of this, bit of that, a little bit of a story here. There's some personal anecdotes plus a mistake that I've made. So rather than it just being very dry, sometimes, but if it's just here's some kit, this is what it's there for, do this, don't do that. It could be the information's there, but it's how it's presented. It's not necessarily as fun or as upbeat as the reader might like. So that's pretty much it. I've gone through my notes from the mindset and the practical side. I'm going to repost this later on just for people that couldn't make it today. But just a reminder that my book is out. It's out in the US right now, and it comes out on March the 1st over here. But feel free to email. I don't know if there's been any questions. We're just going to have a quick look through the scan here. Thanks for watching, guys. See, a couple of people have turned up. A couple of people have asking if it's being recorded. Yeah. Okay, so if anyone's got any questions, feel free to ask. Yeah, coffee's pretty cold now. Like I said, I'm going to repost. I can save this and I can put it on Facebook and I can put it on YouTube. But and if you have any questions about maybe a project that you're working on, a book or a screenplay or anything like that, and any issues that you might be having, it could be a practical thing or it could be, oh, thanks, Polly. It could be a practical thing or a mind thing. I think the mind thing is sometimes the first hurdle that's really big to get your head around, and just sort of, like I said earlier, just about what you're going through your own head and what other people might say, and whether you have that imposter syndrome like I do, about whether you don't quite think that you should be doing it, or why would anyone. Thank you, Matthew. Thanks, mate. Thanks for your comment. Why would anyone want to read what you've put, and who are you to be writing it? Yeah, that could be quite a big thing to get around. Oh yeah, thanks. Yeah, I've got a book launch for those guys that are in Bristol. My book launch is on the 14th at Screenology. So we're going to have a bit of an event there. Screenology is like a new film school. It's been in Bristol for about 3 or 4 years now. And I've done a bit of work there, a bit of teaching, and they said, hey, when you have your book launch here? I said, yeah, cool idea. So I'm going to be doing that, and I'm going to be setting something up in London as well, hopefully about a week after, end of March. Hi, Philippa, thanks for watching. Okay, right, I'm going to sign off, and like I said, I'll repost this, but thank you for those that have stuck it out and listened to me, and I hope we've got some information that might help you with your particular project, whatever you're working on, and yeah, go buy my book. Thanks.